He bought a marriage to save his empire. But her kindness broke the contract. A billionaire forced to marry his maid until he saw her kindness. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The storm outside the Blackwood estate howled through the night, rattling the tall windows of the study. Adrian Blackwood sat behind his oak desk, the glow of the fireplace reflecting in his cold, gray eyes. A file lay open before him, pages stamped with the Blackwood Group seal. 30 days, his lawyer said quietly. If you are not married by the end of this month, the board will hand control of the company to your uncle. Adrian's jaw tightened. So this is what my father's legacy comes down to? A deadline? The lawyer hesitated. The clause was meant to ensure family stability, sir. Adrian rose, pacing toward the window where rain streaked the glass. The city lights shimmered below like a trap he could not escape. I will not let them take what I built. He turned, his voice low and sharp. Find someone. Anyone who will not fall in love with me or my money. Someone who will not ask questions. The lawyer blinked. Sir, anyone? Adrian's gaze landed on the reflection in the window. Maria Reyes, the maid, carrying a stack of freshly folded linens across the hall. Yes, he said slowly. Her. Minutes later, Maria was standing in front of him, her hands still damp from cleaning, eyes wide with confusion. Mr. Blackwood, did I do something wrong? Adrian studied her quietly. She was young, maybe 24, her uniform plain, her posture straight, despite the exhaustion in her face. No, he said at last. You did everything right. That is the problem. She frowned. I am sorry, sir. I do not understand. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Maria, I need a wife. Her breath caught. A wife? Yes, a legal marriage. No feelings, no future, just 6 months of pretending. He leaned on his desk, voice calm but heavy. You will be paid well. $50,000 when it is over. Maria's mouth opened, but no words came. The idea was absurd. She was a maid, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to pay her mother's hospital bills. This is a joke, right? She whispered. Adrian met her eyes. Do I look like a man who jokes? The silence between them thickened. The fire cracked, throwing amber light across his face. Maria's mind spun hospital bills, eviction notices, her mother's frail voice on the phone saying, Do not worry about me, mija. Finally, she swallowed hard. Why me? Because you are honest, he said simply. And honesty is the rarest thing in my world. Her pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to run, but desperation whispered louder. You really want me to marry you? He nodded once. By Monday, she laughed, a short, nervous sound. You are serious. Completely. She looked down at her trembling hands. And when it ends? You walk away richer, he replied. And I keep my company. Maria took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. Then I guess, business it is. For the first time that night, Adrian's expression softened just slightly before the mask returned. Good, he said. Our lawyers will draft the contract in the morning. As she turned to leave, the rain outside softened to a steady rhythm. For reasons she could not explain, Maria looked back once more. He was still watching her, standing by the fire, the light flickering across his sharp features. In that brief moment, she wondered what kind of man would trade love for survival and what kind of woman she would become for agreeing to it. The morning sun crept through the curtains of the Blackwood estate, spilling light across a table covered in neatly stacked papers. Maria sat at the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and read aloud, his tone as cold as the marble floor. Clause number 1. No personal affection or emotional involvement between the parties. Clause number 2. Both parties must attend 5 public events together as husband and wife. Clause number 3. All personal information and financial details remain confidential. Clause number 4. The contract will last for 6 months. Clause number 5. The marriage will be legally dissolved at the end of the agreement, with no further obligations. Maria nodded faintly. Her stomach churned. Each sentence sounded more unreal than the last. Adrian stood by the window, watching the gray sky outside, his expression unreadable. When the lawyer slid the pen across the table, Maria hesitated. Adrian finally turned to her. "If you want to walk away, do it now," he said. "But once you sign, there is no going back." She looked down at the pen. $50,000. Her mother's hospital bills. The eviction notice on the kitchen door. All of it weighed heavier than fear. She signed her name slowly. The sound of the pen scratching across paper echoed in the quiet room. The lawyer gathered the documents, nodded politely, and left them alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian broke the silence. "A car will pick you up tomorrow morning. There will be a ceremony at City Hall. Keep it simple." Maria stood up, clutching her small purse. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." He looked at her. "After tomorrow, you call me Adrian." Her eyes flicked up in surprise. "All right, Adrian." The next day, the city was wrapped in thin fog when they arrived at the courthouse. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. The clerk's voice was mechanical, the fluorescent lights harsh and flat. When the words, "You may now sign," were spoken, Adrian's hand moved first. Maria followed, her signature trembling beside his. When it was done, the clerk smiled out of habit. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." Maria's heart pounded at the sound of it. Mrs. Blackwood. It felt foreign, borrowed, like a dress that did not belong to her. Adrian slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger. It was cold, heavy, and far too real. He leaned slightly closer and said under his breath, "Welcome to your new life." Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle but steady. They walked down the courthouse steps in silence, the driver opening the door to the sleek black car waiting at the curb. Maria slid inside, clutching the ring on her finger as if it might vanish. Adrian followed, phone in hand, already answering a call about the company. The drive to the estate was quiet, except for the hum of the tires on wet pavement. When they arrived, the gates swung open automatically, revealing the vast mansion once more. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, polished wood, chandeliers sparkling above. Yet to Maria, it felt cold, like a museum that people only pretended to live in. Adrian handed her a small envelope. "This contains your bank card. The funds will be transferred by tomorrow. You will move into the East Wing. Mrs. Hill, the housekeeper, will show you around." Maria took the envelope carefully. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," he said evenly. "It is a transaction." That night, Maria stood by the tall window of her new room, looking out at the rain-soaked garden. Somewhere in the house, a piano played softly. She wondered if it was Adrian. The melody was slow, almost aching. She touched the gold ring on her finger again. The reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized, still the same maid's face, but with a name and a title that did not belong to her. Across the hall, Adrian sat alone in his study, staring at the contract that now bound them. His lawyer had congratulated him, but victory tasted hollow. The fire flickered in the grate, casting shadows that made the room feel even larger. He picked up a small photograph of his late mother, her smile gentle and knowing. "Are you proud of me, Mother?" he murmured. "I kept the company, but I lost something I cannot even name." Down the corridor, the same rain that blurred Maria's window tapped against his. Two strangers under one roof, each wondering what they had truly signed away. The following morning, the Blackwood estate was already alive with movement. The scent of polished wood and fresh coffee drifted through the long hallways. Maria stepped quietly into the dining room, unsure if she was even allowed to sit. The table stretched longer than her entire apartment had been. At the far end sat Adrian, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit, reading something on his tablet. He did not look up when he spoke. "You are late." Maria's cheeks warmed. "I am sorry, Mr. Blell," he interrupted without glancing away. "Adrian, remember the rules." "Yes, Adrian." She sat down carefully, the silence between them stretching thin. A maid placed a breakfast tray in front of her, but Maria barely touched it. She was too aware of the heavy quiet, of the way Adrian's eyes finally lifted to meet hers. "You will need to attend a dinner tomorrow," he said evenly. "It is the first public event on our list. I have arranged for a stylist to prepare you. You will do fine as long as you follow my lead." Maria hesitated. "I have never been to anything like that before." "I know," he replied. "That is why we will practice." Practice. The word felt strange, like this marriage required rehearsal. But when he stood and motioned for her to follow, she obeyed. They walked into the main hall where a long mirror stood, beside the grand staircase. "Let us start with posture," Adrian said, his voice clipped but not unkind. "Stand tall, shoulders back. When reporters speak to you, you smile. Do not overdo it." Maria straightened her back, eyes flicking toward her reflection. "Like this?" "Better," he said, circling her slowly, adjusting the way she held her hands. "And when I take your arm, do not freeze. It has to look natural." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. The contact was brief, but enough to make her pulse quicken. He noticed and immediately stepped back. "You will get used to it," he said, his tone softening just a little. That afternoon, a stylist arrived with racks of gowns and boxes of shoes. Maria watched in disbelief as fabric after fabric was draped across her frame. She had never worn anything so fine in her life. When the stylist left, she remained staring at the mirror, running her fingers over the beaded dress. Adrian appeared in the doorway. "Does it fit?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "It feels like I borrowed someone else's life." He tilted his head slightly. "Borrow it well, then." The next evening, the mansion buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cars lined the driveway, flashes from cameras reflected off the marble steps. Maria's heart pounded as the chauffeur opened the car door for her. Adrian stepped out first, adjusting his tie before offering her his arm. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she admitted honestly. He gave a faint smile. "Neither am I." Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glimmered above a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. Music played softly from a live orchestra. Every pair of eyes seemed to turn toward them. Maria tried to remember every instruction. Stand tall, smile gently, speak only when spoken to. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mr. Blackwood, congratulations on your marriage. Quite unexpected. May we know how you two met?" Adrian's smile was polite, practiced. "Fate has a sense of humor," he said. "She was working at my estate. The rest, as they say, is history." The crowd chuckled. Maria forced a small smile. She could feel the weight of whispers around her. The maid he married. She must be lucky. Or clever. Later, when they finally found a quiet corner, Maria exhaled shakily. "I do not belong here." Adrian looked down at her. "You do now." They stood in silence until another guest approached, an elegant woman in a red gown, her smile sharp. "Adrian," she purred, "I did not realize you enjoyed charity events this much." "Victoria," Adrian greeted coolly. "You remember my wife." The woman's gaze swept over Maria, thinly veiled disdain in her eyes. "Of course. It is unforgettable." When she walked away, Maria whispered, "Was that her?" He paused. "My ex-fiancée." "I see." Adrian's expression hardened, but there was something else beneath it. Regret, perhaps, or exhaustion. "Ignore her," he said finally. "You handled yourself well tonight." Maria looked at him, unsure if it was a compliment or another instruction. "Thank you, I think." For the first time, he laughed softly. The sound was brief, unfamiliar, but warm enough to reach her. That night, when they returned home, Maria slipped off her shoes and looked down at the ring on her finger. It no longer felt as heavy as before. Somewhere in the silence of the vast house, she heard the faint echo of Adrian's laughter again, and for the first time, the mansion did not feel entirely cold. The next morning, sunlight poured into the grand kitchen of the Blackwood estate. For once, the air felt lighter. Maria stood at the counter, wearing an apron over her dress, whisking eggs for breakfast. She had always been used to serving others, not cooking for herself, but today felt strangely peaceful. The scent of coffee and butter filled the air. When Adrian entered, his expression softened in surprise. "You cooked?" She looked up quickly. "I hope that is not against any rule in your contract." He almost smiled. It might be the best violation yet. He sat at the table while she placed a plate in front of him. "It is nothing fancy," she said. "Just something simple." He took a bite, paused, and looked up. "It is perfect." For a moment, silence filled the room, comfortable, warm, not the usual cold emptiness. Later that day, Adrian invited her to accompany him to the company headquarters. "You need to understand the world you have married into," he explained. The building towered over downtown, all glass and steel, the Blackwood Group logo gleaming at the top. Employees whispered when they saw her walk beside him. Some smiled politely, others exchanged glances filled with quiet judgment. Inside the boardroom, Adrian presented quarterly results with calm precision. Maria sat quietly at the end of the table, watching the man behind the title. He spoke with command, yet his voice held a fatigue she had never noticed before. After the meeting, one of the senior managers approached her and said with a smirk, "You are lucky, Mrs. Blackwood. Most people have to work their entire lives to stand in this room." She smiled politely. "Luck is not something I believe in. Work and kindness usually do more." The man blinked, taken aback, and Adrian's subtle glance warned him to back off. When they stepped into the elevator, Maria murmured, "People will not stop judging, will they?" "No," he said quietly. "But you can decide whether their judgment defines you." That evening, the mansion glowed under soft lights. Maria found herself in the library, running her fingers along the rows of books. Adrian entered a few moments later, holding 2 cups of tea. "You read?" he asked. "Only when I am trying to escape," she replied. He handed her a cup. "What are you escaping from, now?" She smiled faintly. "From the feeling that I do not belong anywhere." He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "You belong here more than you think." She looked away quickly, afraid that if she met his eyes, she would see something she was not ready to understand. Over the next few weeks, their routines changed. They began having breakfast together. They spoke more, sometimes about trivial things, sometimes about the past. Maria told him stories about her mother's bakery and how she had always wanted to reopen it one day. Adrian listened quietly, almost too quietly, as if afraid to interrupt. One evening, during a storm, the power went out in the mansion. Maria lit candles in the living room while Adrian checked the fuse box. When he returned, she was sitting on the floor beside the coffee table, sketching small drawings in a notebook. "You draw," he said, surprised. "Only when I cannot sleep," she replied. "It helps me think." He sat across from her, the candlelight soft on his face. "What do you think about?" "About what life would look like if I had chosen differently," she said softly. "And what do you see?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes I see peace. Sometimes I see regret." He said nothing, but his gaze held hers for a moment too long. Outside, thunder rumbled, but neither of them moved. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of something fragile, unnamed, and real. When the lights finally flickered back on, Adrian stood and said quietly, "You should get some rest." Maria nodded, closing her notebook. "Good night, Adrian." He paused at the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good night, Maria." As she lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, she realized that somewhere between the signatures and the silence, something had changed. The contract still bound them, but her heart was no longer obeying the rules. A week later, the estate was alive with preparation for the company's annual charity gala. The event was the most public appearance on their contract list, and it would gather politicians, reporters, and the wealthiest families in the city. For Maria, it felt like stepping into a world that would never fully accept her. In her room, the stylist adjusted the final pin in her hair, while the soft hum of the string quartet downstairs drifted through the halls. The gown Adrian had chosen shimmered like champagne under the light. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She was not the maid who had once scrubbed these floors. She looked like someone who belonged, even if she still felt like an outsider inside her own skin. Adrian appeared at the door. For a moment, his usual composure faltered. "You look remarkable," he said. Maria smiled nervously. "Thank you. I will try not to embarrass your company." He offered his arm. "I am not worried about that." As the limousine pulled up to the ballroom entrance, Flashes from cameras exploded in their faces. Reporters called out questions. Adrian tightened his grip on her hand, his expression calm and unreadable. "Remember," he whispered, eyes forward, smile slightly, "and let me handle the rest." She nodded, her heart pounding. Inside, chandeliers sparkled above a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. The orchestra played softly while guests mingled with champagne glasses in hand. Adrian moved easily through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging greetings. Maria followed his lead, her smile polite but distant. Then, a voice called out behind them, "Adrian, I almost did not recognize you with your new accessory." It was Victoria, the ex-fiancée, her tone honeyed but sharp. She approached gracefully, her red dress catching every eye in the room. "Mrs. Blackwood, what an honor," she said with mock sweetness. "How does it feel to go from polishing floors to owning the mansion?" The laughter around them was low but cruel. Maria froze, her cheeks burning. Adrian's hand clenched slightly at his side, but before he could speak, Maria's voice cut through the air, steady, calm, and clear. "It feels heavy," she said softly, "because when you work for something with your hands, you never forget how much it weighs." The room fell silent for a beat. Even Victoria's smirk faltered. Adrian looked at Maria with something like pride. He placed a steady hand on her back and said quietly, "Excuse us." They walked away together, the music resuming behind them. When they reached the balcony overlooking the garden, Maria exhaled, her voice trembling. "I should not have said that." "You should have," Adrian replied. "You were brilliant." She looked at him, uncertain. "You really think so?" He nodded slowly. "I have faced 1,000 board members, and none of them could speak with that kind of strength." For the first time, she saw the man behind the reputation tired, proud, and strangely gentle. The city lights below shimmered across his face. "Why do you do it?" she asked. "All of this, the company, the fight to keep control. Does it make you happy?" He paused. "It used to, but lately I am not sure what any of it means anymore." A light breeze brushed against them. She turned slightly toward him, the distance between them shrinking. For a moment, it felt as if the world outside the balcony did not exist. His voice dropped lower. "You have changed everything in this house, Maria. I do not even recognize it anymore." She hesitated, afraid to move closer but unable to step back. "Maybe it is not the house that changed," she whispered. "Maybe it is you." The orchestra swelled inside, the sound floating through the open doors. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Adrian looked away, breaking the spell. "We should go back," he said. Maria nodded, though her chest ached. Back inside, guests applauded as Adrian took the stage to deliver his speech. He spoke of charity, responsibility, and rebuilding trust in leadership. His words were poised, but when his gaze found her across the room, it softened. Maria felt the connection again, unspoken but undeniable. When the night ended, they rode home in silence. The city lights flashed past the car windows. Maria stared out, her reflection overlapping his in the glass. The contract was still in place, the rules unchanged, yet everything between them had shifted. As the car stopped at the estate gates, Adrian finally spoke. "You did more than survive tonight, Maria. You made them listen." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "And what did you hear?" He met her eyes. "Something I have not heard in a long time. Honesty." The car door opened, and the rain began to fall again, soft, steady, and familiar. Inside that silence, they both understood that the line between contract and feeling had started to blur, and neither of them knew how to stop it. Days passed after the gala, but the silence between them felt different now. It was no longer heavy with distance. It carried a quiet awareness neither of them dared to name. The mansion seemed warmer somehow, as if the walls themselves had softened. One evening, Adrian returned home later than usual. The rain had started again, falling steadily over the city. Maria was in the kitchen, arranging fresh flowers in a vase. When she heard the door open, she looked up. He seemed exhausted, his tie loosened, his hair slightly damp. "You are home late," she said softly. He exhaled, dropping his briefcase on the table. "Meetings. They never end." She poured him a cup of tea and placed it in front of him. Then at least let the day end with something warm. He looked at her, almost surprised. You do not have to do this. I know, she said with a small smile. But I want to. He took the cup, their fingers brushing for a brief moment. The warmth that passed between them was not from the tea. Thank you, he said quietly. They sat together in silence, listening to the rain tapping gently on the windows. For the first time, Adrian spoke about his mother, how she had built the company with integrity, how her death had left him fighting to protect her legacy from those who saw only profit. She wanted the company to be about people, he said, staring into the dark liquid of his cup. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Maria listened closely. Then maybe it is time to remember. Her words lingered in the air, soft but strong. He looked up, his eyes searching hers. You make it sound easy. It is not, she said. But sometimes, the hardest thing is learning to be kind again. He smiled faintly. You talk like someone who has never given up. Maybe because I cannot afford to, she replied. Giving up does not pay the bills. They both laughed, the sound quiet and real. It was the first laughter that did not feel forced by the contract. Later that night, when Maria walked past his study, she heard music playing softly from the piano, the same slow melody she had heard before. She paused at the doorway. Adrian sat at the keys, his back to her, playing with unguarded emotion. That is beautiful, she said quietly. He stopped playing but did not turn around. My mother taught me. I stopped after she died. I did not think I could play without her. And now? Now, he said, finally turning to her. I play because someone reminded me that not everything worth keeping is lost. Maria stepped closer, her heart beating faster. You give too much credit to a maid, she said softly. He shook his head. No, I give credit to the only person in this house who still knows what honesty feels like. They stood facing each other, the soft light from the lamp casting gold on their faces. The air between them grew still, filled with something tender and uncertain. He took a slow step forward. Maria, he said, his voice low, if this were not a contract, if this were real. She stopped him gently, her hand resting over his. Then it would break every rule we agreed to. His eyes held hers for a long moment before he whispered, maybe some rules are meant to break. The words hung there, trembling between them. But Maria pulled her hand back. Do not, she said softly. Not like this, not until we both know what it means. He nodded, the weight of her honesty settling over him like truth he had been running from. You are right, he said quietly. You always are. Maria smiled faintly and stepped away. Good night, Adrian. He watched her go, her silhouette disappearing into the dim hallway. When the door closed behind her, he turned back to the piano and played again, this time slower, softer, each note carrying something he could no longer hide. Upstairs, Maria leaned against her bedroom door, her heart racing. The mansion was silent, but she could still hear the faint music drifting through the halls, a melody of longing, of restraint, and of two hearts that had begun to change long before either of them dared to say it aloud. The following morning began like any other. The sun poured through the tall windows, and the sound of birds echoed across the gardens. But beneath that calm, something uneasy brewed. When Adrian arrived at his office, the atmosphere felt off. Employees whispered in corners, screens flashed, breaking news banners. His assistant rushed in, her face pale. Sir, you need to see this, she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was a headline that made his blood run cold. Blackwood marriage exposed, sources reveal contract between CEO and former maid. Photos from the courthouse, leaked documents, and anonymous quotes filled the article. Within minutes, the story spread everywhere. Adrian's name trended online alongside Maria's. He stood motionless, his hands gripping the desk. Who leaked this? We are still investigating, she said nervously. But the rumor is that Victoria's publicist might be involved. Adrian's jaw tightened. Of course it was her. By the time he reached home, reporters were already gathered at the gates, shouting questions through the rain. Inside, Maria stood by the staircase, clutching her phone. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. Adrian, she said, her voice barely steady. It is everywhere. They are saying I married you for money. He stepped forward. Do not read any of it. How can I not? They are calling me a liar, a fraud. My mother saw it on television. Tears filled her eyes. You said this would stay private. Adrian looked stricken. I will fix this, I promise. Can you? She asked, her voice breaking. Because right now, the only person who can walk away from this unharmed is you. He started to speak, but she shook her head. I knew this was a mistake. I should never have said yes. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Maria, do not, she said, her voice trembling. You have your company to save. I have my dignity to rebuild. She turned and walked up the stairs, leaving him alone in the echo of her footsteps. The mansion, once full of quiet warmth, felt empty again. That night, the storm outside returned with full force. Adrian stood in his study, staring at the contract on his desk, the very paper that had started everything. He read each clause until the words blurred. No affection, no emotion, no future. He realized that he had broken every single rule. He picked up his phone, but he did not call her. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he never meant for this to happen? None of it would erase the humiliation she faced because of him. In the guest room upstairs, Maria packed a small suitcase. The ring still gleamed faintly on her finger, a symbol of a promise that had never been meant to last. She slipped it off, setting it on the nightstand beside a folded note. When Adrian finally went upstairs, the room was empty. Only the letter remained. He unfolded it slowly. You taught me to stand tall in a world that never saw me, but now I have to stand on my own. The rain pounded harder against the glass as he whispered her name into the silence, but there was no answer, only the echo of what he had lost. 2 weeks passed. The media storm raged on, but Adrian no longer cared about the headlines. Every morning he arrived at the office, went through the motions, and left long after sunset. The mansion felt colder than ever, stripped of the small warmth that Maria had brought into it. Her absence was louder than any scandal. One night, his assistant entered his office hesitantly. Sir, there is something you should see. She placed a file on his desk. Inside were photographs from the hotel fire downtown, a charity branch owned by the Blackwood Foundation. One picture froze him in place. In it, Maria was covered in ash, helping a child out of the burning building. She was not supposed to be there, yet she had risked everything without hesitation. She was volunteering that night, his assistant said quietly. No reporters, no cameras. She did not want anyone to know. Adrian stared at the image until his throat tightened. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and left. The next morning, the press conference for the Blackwood Group was already packed. Cameras clicked, lights flared, and every reporter waited for a statement. Adrian stepped up to the microphone, his expression calm but resolute. I owe the public an explanation, he began. Yes, there was a contract. It began as business. But the woman you have judged so harshly is the only person who reminded me what integrity truly means. He paused, scanning the crowd. When everyone else saw opportunity, she saw humanity. And when I saw her as a solution, she became my conscience. He raised the photograph of Maria carrying the child through smoke. While the world was busy gossiping about her past, she was saving lives without expecting anything in return. This is who she really is. The room fell silent. Cameras flashed, but Adrian did not flinch. If protecting my company cost her peace, then I no longer want that kind of success. From this day forward, the Blackwood Foundation will be led in her name, because kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the reporters' questions. His car sped through the city until it stopped at a quiet street lined with small shops. One window glowed softly in the rain. A wooden sign read Maria's Bakery. Through the glass, he saw her laughing with a customer, flour dusted on her hands. She looked at Peace. For a long moment he stood outside, drenched, holding the folded photograph to his chest. Then he pushed open the door, the bell chiming gently above him. She looked up in surprise, her eyes widening. Adrian, she whispered. He smiled faintly, his voice steady. I have been looking for you, and I am not leaving until you hear what I came to say. The bakery was warm and filled with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. Maria stood frozen behind the counter, unsure if she was dreaming. Adrian, the man she thought she had left behind, stood in front of her, drenched from the rain but smiling as if he finally knew what peace looked like. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron. "Why are you here?" "To return what never should have been broken," he said quietly. He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter, a simple gold ring. It was the same one she had taken off weeks ago. Maria stared at it. "Adrian, you do not have to do this. I saw your speech. You already did more than enough." He shook his head. "That speech was not for the world. It was for you. Everything I have built means nothing if I cannot share it with the one person who taught me what love is supposed to look like." Her eyes softened. "Love was never part of our contract." "Then let us write a new one," he said, unfolding a single sheet of paper. "It only has one clause." She hesitated, then read the words written in his bold handwriting. Clause 1, "You never leave me again." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You cannot just undo everything with one sentence," he smiled gently. "No, but it is a start." He knelt right there on the bakery floor, surrounded by the scent of sugar and rain, holding out the ring. "Maria Reyes, will you marry me for real this time, not for business, not for show, but because I am hopelessly in love with you?" Her hand trembled as she covered her mouth. The customers nearby had grown silent, watching the scene unfold. After a long moment, she whispered, "Yes." Adrian slipped the ring back onto her finger, his eyes bright with relief. The bakery erupted in quiet applause, and Maria laughed through her tears. He stood and pulled her into his arms as the rain outside slowed to a gentle drizzle. Later, as the two of them stood by the window, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the counter. Maria looked up at him. "So what happens now?" He smiled. "Now we start over. No contracts, no deadlines, just us." She leaned against his shoulder, her voice soft. "Then let us make this one last forever." The camera of the story would linger to save his empire, hands, but her gold ring gleaming against the morning light, the same ring that had once symbolized obligation, now shining as a promise freely chosen. Voiceover for the final line. He bought a marriage to save his empire, but in the end, it was her kindness that saved him.